The Scott Goldman. When it comes to confidence, how would you define, like, how would you put your personal definition on confidence? How would you define it?
Well, first of all, good question. Way to start off hot. Second, to be referred to with the with the in front of it puts a little bit more pressure, right? The Skackle. Um, but all right, so I think confidence it's an interesting construct because I think for some people talking about confidence is almost like trying to describe the flavor of salt without using the word salty, right?
Mm,
And and it's interesting because my dissertation was on confidence, and one of the things I discovered was that there's not really a uniform definition. It's one of these concepts that we all feel like we know, but no one's really measured or truly defined it. So that was part of what I tried to do in my dissertation was come up with a definition for it. And when I looked through all the research, you found synonyms or you found sort of mutations of the word. So it'd be like confidence is competence or confidence is, kind of thing. And so what I ended up coming up with that I think is somewhat different than what you might see or hear in some of the other literature is confidence is a physiological emotional state. And I think where most people will talk about it as an emotional construct, I don't think as many people talk about the physiological aspect of confidence. So it's confidence is a physiological emotional state based on a belief of accomplishment or capability of getting something accomplished.
Explain the physiological part of it.
I'm so glad that's where we're going. Awesome. When we think about emotional states of being, we can aptly describe them through physical experiences. So, for example, if I asked you what it feels like to be anxious, what would you say?
What would it feel like to be anxious?
What would your body tell you? How would your body let you know you're anxious?
Tense, um, unsettled,
Right?
kind of always fidgety a little bit, just not calm, I'll say, just moving around a little bit uneasy.
Right? So fidgety, heart
Mhm.
racing, breathing shallow, eyes dilate, same thing. Like if I was to ask you, like, what does it feel like to be depressed? Well, tired, lethargic, hard to get out of bed. So it's funny because when we talk about confidence, it's all about just like almost like a bravado. And I'm going, no, like I think the same way, like when you talk about tense and anxiety, then you talk about like relax and it being a muscle that's loose.
Mhm.
Confidence is a physiological state of readiness that I think when you measure the physiology of confidence, what you see is you see like a heart rate kind of variability that's rhythmic. You hear and witness a breathing pattern that is slow and steady. Not necessarily slow, but steady or pattern. So it's like that shallow breathing of anxiety, like where you're hyperventilating. Like, an athlete who's kind of in a flow state, they'll talk about having more of like a steady rhythmic breathing pattern. So I think part of it is when you ask people what it feels like to be confident, they can tell you that they're feeling confident. They go, "Oh, I feel confident." They go, "Okay, well, describe it." That's where all of a sudden it becomes, "Oh, like my muscles feel ready." Well, what does that mean? Like,
Mhm.
well, they're warmed up and they're ready to fire. Like they're good. Like, I don't have like a pit in my stomach. It's funny how when you went and defined it, you almost talked about sort of the absence of some of the other stuff, right? So
Mhm.
that becomes an interesting mechanism too, because I think there are times where you can say like confidence is the absence of fear. I actually tend to pull away from that definition. I think confidence is when you experience fear or anxiety and still find a mechanism to go forward with it. And so I think that's another element of confidence to define.
Hmm. So you would say confidence is in the same line of being courageous or brave.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, one of the things that is a blessing and a curse with the world of psychology is we play with language and we value language. And so sometimes it's like relabeling it, right? Like to brave. Sometimes it's about defining it, like talking about the physiological state of it. But, fundamentally, when we think of someone, we go, that person's really confident. I think we all like it's one of those things where we might not have a uniform definition, but we do have a universal concept. So the confident person is the person who's going to take the shot. The competent person is the person who's going to make the shot.
Mm.
So confidence, I think, is the idea. It really is, in my humble opinion, a belief state, not a factual state. Now, historical experience might help someone feel more confident, like, well, I made the last shot, so why would I think differently when I put up this shot?
Mm.
But I think confidence is, again, it's a physiological, psychological construct that is this idea of like, I think I can do this.
Mm.
And what's really interesting is we ask some people why, there's no explanation other than, nah, I think I'm good. I remember there was a great interview with the comedian and writer Larry David, who is a diehard New York Jets fan. And he gave to the interviewer an idea that he thought he could be the offensive coordinator for the New York Jets. And the interviewer was like, based off of what? Like, have you ever played football? And he's like, no. He goes, have you ever coached football? I said, no. He goes, but like growing up, I used to drop some pretty creative plays in the schoolyard. And the interviewer goes, Larry, you realize that sounds as ridiculous as some football players saying, I think I can write an award-winning epic TV show like Seinfeld. And he was like, well, maybe they can, but I believe I can call good offensive plays. And it's funny because it's such a level of ridiculousness to think he could pull it off, but it's the definition of confidence that he truly believed. Like, he wasn't joking. He's like, I really do think I can manage a game and call a game for the New York Jets.
Mm.
Confidence doesn't necessarily have to be backed up with fact.
You ever stepped on the court and it's almost like you forget how to hoop? Like you were just killing it to practice before, but then the game time hits and warms you a little less confident, not feeling as much. But then the game hits. It's almost like somebody took your controller and they unplugged it and it just turned it off. It's not working anymore. So now game time coming, you start pump faking on wide open shots, and on the fast break you're hesitating. And by the end of the game, the coach is like, "Who is this kid? Why are they on my team? How'd they get on my team? I don't recognize this player anymore." It's almost like that Space Jam scene when the NBA players got their talent stolen by the aliens, and they start looking around like, "Where am I? What is going on with me?"
Come on, we're okay. We're okay. You're all right. Come on, let's go.
Come on, Patrick, it's showtime.
And I get it. I feel you. Confidence is a really tricky thing. It's weird. But I got some good news for you right here. You don't have to hope to feel confident every game, because I made something special just for you. I have a pre-game and a post-game checklist for your confidence. All right. It's the things you can do before you step on the court to make sure that you feel confident, and to bounce back after the game to make sure that you're always improving and building your game. So hit the link below and it'll be sent straight to you guys. And it's going to help you out so you don't feel like that 2K player that's just glitching in the middle of the game anymore.
And his name is John Cena.
All right, so it's going to have you get back to feeling like yourself and playing like you never have before. So go ahead and hit the description below and lock in with us and get your confidence rebuilt.
Okay, that leaves me something I wanted to ask. I'm glad we got there. Do you believe there are just like naturally confident people? Because we kind of come to that conclusion of like somebody like an Anthony Edwards is like, oh, he's just a confident person. Like he truly believes he can go stop basketball right now, go to the NFL and take over whatever position he wants to play. He can truly go to the MLB. He can truly he like fully believes that in his heart. And he's one of the people that we just look at and it's like, oh, he's a confident person. He just believes he can snap in any arena, in any field, put any title on him, and he can take over and dominate. So you believe that there are just naturally confident people, or there's some other factor that we're missing that makes them that confident?
Well, and just to kind of have a healthy contrarian point of view, and just to kind of engage in a fun sort of discussion, we don't fully know in his heart that he's confident. What we know is that he makes a lot of confident statements. And there are people who can make verbal statements, but not necessarily back them up. Now, I agree with you. I think he is a person that has a higher level of confidence, especially in the world of sports. And one of the pieces of evidence isn't just what he says verbally, but also what he does physically. Like, it's like, all right, he finds a will and a way to get to the basket and score a point. Like, you know, if there's an opportunity to take the last shot of the game, I think he's calling for it and that kind of stuff. Those are all displays of confidence. What's interesting, though, is like, is confidence universal? So again, like Larry David saying, I can call plays for the New York Jets. It'd be an interesting question to be like, hey, Anthony Edwards, like if you were stranded on a deserted island, do you have skills to like start a fire or to fish or to, what would happen from like a survival kind of mechanism? And he might go, I'm really confident in sport, but I'm not so confident in the idea of like how to start a fire by rubbing two sticks together. Like, I don't know. I'm just saying, at some point, confidence can also be a mechanism of delusion. Like, hey, I think I can fly. I'm confident I can fly. So I'm going to jump off this cliff. Like, I don't care how confident you are, like that might not be a good choice. So going back to the question at hand, though, which is kind of like that sort of nature-nurture debate. Are we kind of born, or are some people born, or is this something that's fostered? I think human beings are complicated. I think human behavior is complicated. I think when we start talking about emotional constructs, I think they're complicated. So I think there is a genetic component to our emotional well-being. So, for example, pain tolerance is been tied to some genetic contribution. One of the more famous studies that kind of tapped into this was they took newborn babies and they gradually made the light brighter in the room to see at what wattage of brightness they would start to cry. And the idea was they were kind of taking on John Locke's, the philosopher / psychology guy. John Locke had this thing called tabula rasa, which is all about like blank slate, that we're all born as a blank slate. And so, certain behaviorists in psychology kind of took that concept and went one step further. Like Watson talked about, give me a baby and I can make him a butcher, a baker, or a candlestick maker. In other words, all we have to do is condition people to do things. So going back to the study, what they did was they slowly made the wattage brighter to see if all babies would, because they're newborn, they haven't been imprinted yet, they haven't been conditioned yet, and bright light's an irritant. So the idea is if we are truly born as blank slates, then all babies should cry at the same wattage of brightness or irritation. And instead, some babies were really highly resistant. They didn't cry to a much brighter intensity of light. And others cried at a very low intensity of light. So there is an argument that says some people think pain tolerance is genetic. So how does that involve with confidence? Well, I think one major contribution to confidence is past success, right? It's a belief state of, I can do this. What's that based off of? I've done it before. Well, what gives people the ability to do it for the first time is, I think, a level of genetic predisposition to tolerate the discomfort of what you're about to go through. So you can talk about some of the best conditioned athletes in the world. Most of them will say, I don't really enjoy working out, but the level of discomfort of lifting weights or running the stadium steps and all that stuff can vary quite differently between people's discomfort and their experiences of discomfort. So I would propose that there is a genetic component to confidence. One, in the ability to tolerate the discomfort, to persevere through a tough experience and perseverance leading to that outcome of success. And then I think the other element is capability. Like I'm 5'6". You could probably measure my vertical with a stack of credit cards, and I can confidently say that I am not confident about dunking a basketball. So, I mean, you got to have some certain element of capability. Now, what's amazing to me is, remember back in the day, there was a guy, Spud Webb. I think he was 5'5",
Mhm.
and I believe he won a slam dunk competition a couple of times. So
Mhm.
apparently his genetic composition is different than mine, or he trained to have those kinds of verticals that I never was exposed to or experienced. So the whole nature nurture, I think it's a combination of the two that helps us become confident.
Yeah, that's kind of the conclusion I came to because you hear people talk and it's like I'm more cognizant of the language that we use. And so I don't think they truly mean it sometimes, but they'll say, like if you had four kids, you'll say, I have this one kid that is just a confident kid. He's just a confident person. And then my other daughter, she's confident when it comes to this specific area. And we use that as the barometer of what confidence is. This is a naturally confident person that no matter what, no matter where they are, they're going to be confident. And then you have this other person when they're in the right area that they specialize in, they're extremely confident. You take them out of that and you know, they're not confident, whatever the opposite of that would be. And then you have the other person who just seems insecure and they're just never confident at all in anything. And I think it's really more, most people fall in line with the middle child or the second example I gave of that you don't see them in that area where they are confident. But you take most people outside of that, then they seem average at best. But I think there's like the hidden factor of like the first person who has the ability to say, I'm very confident in specific areas, but I also have an underlying confidence that I'm able to figure things out. I'm able to understand the situation or whatever I'm in to be a higher level of confidence than the average person would be. And that's kind of what I've come to of that. The confident people just have a 10% higher confidence in general, but it's not like I'm just absurdly confident in every area of my life. Versus the average person there have this specialist, I'm in this area, I can do this thing, and I'm great at that. Outside of there, I don't know. I'm not the best. So that's kind of what I came to the conclusion of that people that we deem as just confident all around, they just have a little bit more confidence in every area of more areas of their life than the average person. Not just they're just genetically gifted to be indestructible in their confidence. They just have a little bit more than the average person. They believe they can figure stuff out, like Larry David. Like I think I can do it. I'm pretty sure I can do it.
But you know what's fascinating? And again, when I was doing my dissertation, I came across a study where they asked Olympic medal winners, not just Olympians, not just premier athletes, but Olympic medal winners. So remember, like gold, silver, bronze, like these are the top 3 performers of the event every 4 years. I mean, it's a pretty significant thing to win a medal, right? And when they asked them what was the one thing they wish they could have more of from a psychological performance construct, the number one answer that was given was confidence.
Hmm.
So it kind of left me kind of scratching my head, like, how is it that Olympic medal winners are asking for more confidence? If anybody, those should be the ones that are most confident, right? Like, hey, you just took gold in the 100 meters. Like, that's a pretty big deal.
Yep.
And you want more confidence? Like, that's wild to me. So I think the other part of the concept of confidence is understanding what it is. It's also like understanding how to go about and get it. Because if winning a gold medal doesn't do it for you, then what does? And I think a lot about it, and it's funny how you mentioned, like having children. So I have 2 sons, and, I'd love for them to be confident, and I'd love for them to feel courageous and brave in what they can do. And as a father, I try to create environments where they're confident, can be developed, where their confidence can be developed. Part of, I think, creating a confident environment or an environment that can help instill a level of confidence is encouraging them and challenging them to fail, right? Like, I don't know if confidence is just about, hey, make the game-winning shot or, get an A+ on every test. I think confidence is also about the idea of going like, okay, like you challenge yourself beyond what you thought you were capable of doing. And whether you succeed or fail at that, you can at least acknowledge that you pushed yourself beyond that boundary. And I think every time you push yourself beyond a boundary, you expand your boundaries. And you redefine what you believe you're capable of doing. Whether that's a young child learning to ride a bike, they fall. Like, that's part of falling. I mean, that's part of learning how to ride is falling. And I think we as parents, our job is knowing when to let go of the bicycle seat. You let go too soon, they fall, they cry, and they lose confidence to never get back on the seat. You hold on too long and they never develop that level of independence or confidence to say, hey, I can do this without your help. So, I think, when we talk about inducing confidence, I think there's an element to it, which is we start with some genetic capabilities. Then we have some environmental influences that condition us. And then there's also what Tolman called the black box, which is kind of like between our ears, which is, what are some of the things that we say to ourselves? So again, whether it's the guy who goes to hit the game-winning shot and misses and says, okay, well, I'll try again tomorrow, versus the guy who goes to take the game-winning shot and makes it and then says, all right, I did that, I'm never going to try that again. Like, it's really an interesting kind of mechanism of how to foster confidence.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because another thing I was thinking about was it's not that some people are just going back to the first kid I was mentioning earlier. It's not that they're just extremely confident overall. It's them being comfortable with failure and saying, I'm willing to look goofy as a dancer on this floor, but look extremely confident at the same time because the fear of failure is not there for me. Your judgment is not there for me. And I think that's the key piece of confidence that we kind of skip over. It's not the fact that they're like Kobe's not afraid to make the shot or miss the shot. He's going to live and die with that outcome no matter what. And that's where his confidence comes from, because I've trained, I put in the work. So the self belief is there. Like you said, he's telling himself, I can hit this shot, but he knows I can hit this shot because I've trained and prepared for it. And I have past success to prove that I can do this. But the part that separates him from other people too is the fact that I can live and die with the outcome of it. And so sometimes those people who just seem to be confident no matter what, or to be brave no matter what, it's them living and dying with the judgment or the fear of failure. And that's what I think is the outward expression of that confidence versus Ant-Man saying he can do it, and then going out there and actually doing it, and then he still don't look shook afterwards. It's like, oh, he's really different. I don't live and die by your judgment of what I did. I just do things because I feel free enough to do it. So if I fail, fine, I failed, but I did it and I'm fine moving afterwards. So I think that's the key piece that I think that separates the, universally confident people from, other people who just don't have it all together. That's one of the main key pieces that I think about sometimes.
Yeah. So Dave Chappelle did an interview on Inside the Actors Studio, and he told this amazing story that I ended up clipping, and I send it to athletes all the time because I go, gosh, Dave Chappelle really, in my mind, just captured a beautiful concept. So Dave Chappelle tells the story about the first time he went on stage. He got booed. He got booed off stage. It was in front of a whole group of people in the audience. He said his grandmother was sitting there, and he said it was horrible. It was horrifying. And he's like, who wants to get booed on stage? He goes, they sounded the horn and Sandman came out and kind of pulled him off stage with the classic hunk and everything. And he's like, he goes, it was horrible. He said, got off stage. He took a moment. He said, this is not that bad.
Mm.
And from that moment on, he felt fearless. So it's interesting, right? Because going back to the concept of confidence, sometimes we also talk about what it's not, right? Being confident is for the absence of. And I think when there is this element of someone who says, all right, I just got punched in the face. I now know I can tolerate being punched in the face. I can take that on again. I can go for it again. So here's an interesting one for it. Like, you know what the number one fear is in human beings? The highest, most highly rated phobia?
Isn't it like public speaking, I think?
Snakes. Snakes is number one.
Hmm.
Which some have made the argument that our DNA alters after a traumatic event. If we survive a traumatic event, the DNA alters, and then that DNA is replicated and pushed forward through our offsprings, right? So again, going back to the genetic concept. So someone made the argument that more people die by cars than they do by snakes every year in modern society. But more people are afraid of snakes than they are of cars.
Hmm.
So the theory is, back in the day when we were all walking and roaming the earth, living in caves and hunting for, mastodons or whatever the case it was, snakes were a much bigger threat. And those that were attacked by a snake or bit by a snake and survived and ended up creating children, that sort of stayed in our DNA. Which goes to the second most common phobia, which is what you said, public speaking. So it's weird, like more people are actually afraid of public speaking than they are of death. And you go, okay, well, what's the kind of psychological evolutionary concept of that? Well, again, back in the day when we're all hunting mastodons, like to get a mastodon required more than just one or two people. Like you needed kind of a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the tribe hunted together and captured a mastodon, they ate well for a while, right? So the concept was to acquire food or to protect ourselves from being attacked by a lion or a tiger or who knows what, bear. We had to tribe up. And when we created this tribal mechanism, we became one of the few species on this planet to really live in a communal way. There's ants and dolphins, like we're not the only ones, but we did it in a way that was so significant that to be kicked out of the tribe significantly hindered your chance of survival. So I think the concept that I germinate on is fear of other people's opinion, fear of judgment and criticism is way more powerful than the fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to, and you can name any athlete you want, I try not to reference just because I don't know them personally. And if I do know them personally, I'm not going to talk about them. But like when you just talk about an athlete, I think something that's really remarkable is the man in the arena quote, right? The Ted Roosevelt quote, like, no one knows what it's like to be in front of a crowd of thousands of people that are cheering or more powerfully booing you, cheering for you or cheering against you, and you having to put it all on the line.
Mm-hmm.
One of the criticisms that I have about the field of sports psychology in general is I question how often those of us that have studied psychology have ever actually put themselves in the kind of pressure cooker of the players and athletes that we've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched some of my colleagues and friends and whatnot, and they post these things on LinkedIn where they're like, they're doing the video of themselves kind of walking, talking, and they'll go, hey, you just be the best version of yourself and be fearless and go for it and go for broke. And I go, when was the last time you ever took a chance like that? When was the last time you were exposed and vulnerable to that kind of public scrutiny where someone from somewhere could just go on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now and tell you how bad you suck? I have so much respect and admiration for those that enter their arena and are willing to get booed as much as cheered, and then do it again and again and again. I think that it's more people are afraid of being kicked out of the tribe than they are of death. And so to deal with that kind of public criticism, I mean, our fans have never had more access to their heroes than ever before.
Mm.
And sometimes that's probably a good thing. Like, hey, my daughter loves you and she's got some disease, and would you be willing to think, oh, here's an autographed pair of shoes. I hope she feels better. Like, what a wonderful story that is. And then there's the, I hope you die. It's like, I'm grateful that fans are so invested because, it helps pay for the industry to continue to be open. Like, no one buys a ticket, the league folds. So I'm grateful that fans are invested. I do feel a sense of sadness when that investment mutates to a place where they feel comfortable enough to send a death threat. And I've had there when I was working with an NFL team, I remember there was a running back. And he hands his phone to me. He goes, "What am I supposed to make of this?" Like, we were talking about confidence and stuff. He goes, "What am I supposed to make of this?" And it was an instant. It was a DM that said, "Hey, you cost me my fantasy football playoffs. I hope you effing die and your children suffer." I mean, like, it was like a long passage of just venom. And he's like, how am I supposed to not be impacted by that?
Oh man, I think that's kind of going back to what you were saying about the people in your space, your peers and whatnot. And I think that a lot of times I kind of dabble in that field some too, of being an instructor or a teacher giving some level of information to people, and we're not in that environment per se. So I can give a player all these drills and tell them to be strong and be confident doing it, but I can never exactly be in his or her shoes of what they have to do, especially in this day and age, the way things are, because I'm not them. And I think that we have to be more mindful and cognizant of that. We can say things, but it's another level of wisdom that comes through when you've, like you said, you've been that man in the arena. So player to player, it's like, hey, I already understand where you're coming from now because I know you've been the man in your arena. You've had the same pressure. That's why people who reach a certain level of success, they reach a certain level of celebrity, they will clean together because it's like to deal with this fame and this pressure. So we ought to talk the same language. You ought to wear the same clothes. We ought to understand because I'm the man in my arena. You're the woman in your arena. So we already here. And I think we do have to do a better job of being intentional, putting ourselves in that arena. So now, instead of just having these cliche posts or these cliche things to say that sounds really cute, or like, man, I woke up and I just had this message on my mind this morning. Just go out and go get it. It sounds good. Like, it sounds really amazing. But some of that stuff becomes like very woo woo, and it's kind of just in one ear out the other for me personally. But when an athlete's telling you, man, I went through, like you said, I have the DMs and this is what I'm dealing with, it's like that woo woo stuff doesn't really sound the same because that doesn't connect with me. So I think we do have to do a better job of speaking in a way or teaching in a way that really connects with them better. And sometimes it's just us being in that arena as well. So um, I did want to say that.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the depth of that
Mm,
because I think not all cuts require a Band-Aid. Like, some cuts require stitches, right?
mm,
And some even require surgery. Like, it's about really appreciating and respecting humanity and the uniqueness of each human being. And I think sometimes that's the complexity that we miss, is that when someone fails, I think there is a feeling of discomfort or pain with that. Now, to what degree and what level of severity, I think that differs quite a bit. Like, to say, oh, hey, I love failing, or it's such a great experience, it's a mutation that I don't think is healthy, right? Like, it would be like saying, hey, my dog died. That's awesome. Now I no longer have to feed it. Well, man, unless you're a sociopath or a robot, when you have a major significant change in your life, like your dog dying, or when you failed at something that was really important to you. So sometimes, like when I'm talking with athletes to help with their confidence, one of the things that we'll talk about is sometimes the value of the experience or the value of the object or the person can be measured by the degree of pain that it's felt in its absence. So if you love a vase and it breaks, well, let's say you love it, but you love it because you found it at some store. It was $5. It was like a super cool find. You're like, hey, $5 vase, that's cool. You're like, yeah, it broke. You're like, yeah, it's good while it lasted. I can live with that.
Mhm.
Then let's say it's a vase that maybe like you went to some rare antiquity store and the vase was $5,000. It was like a Ming Dynasty vase. And that one breaks. You're like, that's going to sting a lot worse. And then you have a different kind of vase where it's like, maybe it's a vase that you don't even know what the valuation of it is, other than it's been with your family. Like it was with your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents. And when that thing breaks and it's irreplaceable, it hits you in a different kind of way.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes, part of confidence for me in working with elite athletes, it's not about dialing down their emotions or trying to eliminate their emotions. It's almost about really just owning them and turning the emotions into a force of energy.
Mhm.
I think fear can be a really powerful motivator to get someone to work out
Mhm.
when they don't feel like working out. So I think knowing and understanding how people relate to their own emotional experience is where I tend to focus and engage versus just telling everybody like, just go for it. Life is hard, suck it up. Like, I don't know. There's sometimes those platitudes, they just fall flat for me.
Mhm.
Personally.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to go here with you. If you were giving, and then go back to, like you said, the John Locke experiment, if you were given a blank slate and you could construct a child from zero to, you know, whatever state you need to get to, what would be like the pillars that you would focus on, and how would you construct the environment for them to become a confident person?
That's a great question. That's a fun question. Cool. I think the pieces of the puzzle that I would want to put together is a lot of what we've already talked about. Like, it would be something that had a challenge to it, like just outside their capability.
Mhm.
So it expands their bubble. I'd also like there to be some element of value to it, like again, the vase kind of stuff. So it's not just the idea of going for it, it's about going for it because it means something to you. And then the one element that we haven't talked about yet, and now's a great time to introduce it, would also be the concept of self-attribution. So going back to the teaching your child to ride a bike, what's really neat is there comes a point where they start to get it and you kind of let go. And when you let go, they panic like, dad, 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 like you got to hold on, hold on. And so then there's this idea where like you kind of maybe hold on to the seat with two fingers kind of thing. So that they think you're holding on, but you're not.
Mhm.
And that would be the opposite of self-attribution. Like what would be neat is to create experiences where they think they're the ones doing it when actually they have more support to help ensure their success than they're aware of. And one of the best experiences I can think of is, back in the early stages of my career, I used to take chronic patients. I used to take troubled youth with pretty significant and severe psychological pathology, people who had attempted suicide, people who had been sexually abused. I mean, really, people who have had their confidence shaken through horrors and tragedies. And we would take them rock climbing. So it was an out and down program. And one of the cool things about rock climbing is as you're climbing the rock, I would have the rope. I would belay them so I could hold them. So they would struggle. And they'd be like, put me down, put me down, put me down. And I would hold them. I'd be like, look, you're okay. You're safe. Just take a moment and kind of work through that discomfort. And then they would go right back to it. It's like, great. So you could kind of ensure their safety, even in the moment of panic. But then there were times where someone might not be very coordinated or they weren't very strong and they just couldn't pull themselves up. And so what's neat is because they're focused on the rock and the rope is generally behind them, if you do it right, you can kind of pull on the rope that almost is like spotting a weightlifter. Like you can take their own body weight off of them, thus making it easier for them to climb up, but they don't feel the pull because you don't tug it. You just slowly, gently kind of pull it. And so what's amazing about that is they'll make it to the top. You can kind of guarantee that they'll make it to the top, but they think they're the ones that did it. And that kind of self-attribution, I did this. I taught myself. I got myself through this. That is a real important part of confidence that I don't think people talk nearly enough about.
Mm. One thing I think about when it comes to that too is I hear a lot of older people from, different generations, and they'll say, my generation and younger, oh, we lack the ability of resilience. We lack, to use a different term, long-term suffering. We lack perseverance. How much does that play a role in confidence too?
So I find generational bickering to be fascinating
Yeah.
because there was a time when Elvis Presley shaking his hips was an outrage.
Mhm.
And then, just to show you how old I am, like I own Two Live Crew. They're banned in the USA album. Like I own that. You know what I mean? Like, so we go, okay, Elvis Presley shaking his hips to Two Live Crew's, lyrics.
Mhm.
How do you even compare those? And then you go, okay, and I forget the name of the artist, but her song, WAP.
Oh yeah.
What's her name?
Cardi B.
Thank you, Cardi B. And you're going, okay, are these things more extreme? Are they different? So I guess there's this idea of like every generation thinks that the next generation has it easier. Like back in my day, I had to walk uphill in the snow, kind of thing. And then it's like these kids, they got it so easy today. I mean, I could be wrong on this, but I think part of what we're trying to do as a species, as a society, is we're trying to make our lives easier. Like I want my children to have it easier than I had it. Like that's the idea of success. So, it's an interesting concept when it comes to resilience. And so it begs the question, right? Like, are 5-day work weeks enough? Are 3-day work weeks enough? And I'm kind of going on all over the place, so thanks for letting me ramble for a sec. But I am finding that there are some noticeable differences because the technology has sped up the difference. Again, delayed gratification is less needed because a cell phone can get you just about anything you need almost instantaneous.
Mhm.
So to talk about resilience from a generational standpoint, I think misses the boat that there are still some pretty amazing people at different generational age groups that are unbelievably resilient and doing all kinds of amazing things like swimming the English Channel or climbing, Mount Everest. Like, it's still being done. So I think the idea of categorizing any group runs the risk of being inaccurate.
Mhm.
Now, with that said, we have created more luxuries and people are exposed to more luxuries. And maybe so sorry, thank you for letting me ramble.
Mhm.
And you're giving me a lot of like warm memories. I remember, I mentioned how I worked for these really, these kids that were just in horrible situations. I mean, like there was one kid whose parents brought him, he was hog-tied like cattle would be like wrangled. He was hog-tied with his arms and his
Mhm.
feet behind his back, arms and feet, and carried in, with, telephone cord.
Mhm.
And this other kid who was thrown in a closet by his dad and left there alone in the dark for 3 days. No food, no water, 3 days, because 3 days until death, until he was like near death. And that was like the form of punishment his dad would give. I mean, it just horrible, horrible stories, right? I went from that kind of work environment to working on the Upper East Side of New York City, which is one of the wealthier neighborhoods in the country, if not the world, right? And I remember for the first couple of weeks I was working there, I was working with some people of similar age range, adolescents, and they were talking about like how much their teacher annoyed them, or how much homework they had to do. And I just remember being like, "You don't really have a real problem, like toughen up, Buttercup," kind of thing. Like, so I kept kind of dismissing some of these early patients because of the comparable. I was like, "You've never been thrown up." Like, to talk about being in a closet for 3 days is so foreign. It would be like you and me talking about living on Mars. And my supervisor at the time, his name's Albert Ellis. He's a world-renowned, like he's one of the American Psychological Association referenced him as one of the top 3 psychologists in the history of the 20th century of psychology. Like his
The Albert
Sigmund Freud,
Ellis?
yeah, the Albert Ellis. Like I
That's
co-led him with
crazy.
stuff. Yeah, unbelievable training, unbelievable training. So Al kind of notices that I keep kind of like, I keep kind of quote unquote firing the patients because I'm like, they come in and they go, "Oh, my homework's so hard." I'm like, "Yep, life's tough. Get out there, rub some dirt on it and go out there." And he finally said to me, he goes, "Look, like your hardest day is your hardest day." And that always stuck with me because I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you know,
Mhm.
if your hardest day is having a hangnail, it irritates, it snags on your coat, like it's painful and it's annoying. If that's your hardest day, that's still your hardest day. That's still your reference point." And so what he taught me was, rather than judging what has merit or worth of one's hardship, you should really focus on their experience of that hardship. So to say kids today are soft like baby poop, one, I think you're grouping a lot of people, and that already makes you wrong.
Mhm.
That makes you as wrong as if you were to group race, religion, socioeconomic status, or anything else. With that said, there can be certain trends because they do have shared experiences, like a generation that all went through COVID during a developmental stage. That shared experience might have created some uniform or common type of imprint or footprint on it. But to say like they're softer, or to say like what they're reacting to or what they're upset about is not valid because of what I went through, and what I'm upset about when I went through it was so much more worthy of being upset, is kind of a ridiculous notion. So rather than judge them, whoever they are, for lacking resilience, I actually think it's better to explore the impact of their discomfort. And then it's like, okay, now how can we help you navigate? So if we're talking about a hangnail versus a torn ACL, 2 very different experiences, but if one is your worst day, one is your other worst day, can we not necessarily treat them the same, but treat the reaction to them the same, that would hopefully foster a stronger resilience post that experience.
Mm.
Does that make sense, or was that just a bunch of rambling gibberish? Because I kind of went long there.
No, it makes sense. And my brain is just, there's so many different avenues I want to go down. It's trying to like navigate on one and try to stay focused on one. So it's like Albert Ellis kind of threw me off, and I was like, wait, like him? Okay, all right. Like that's man, that's crazy. But yeah,
What's funny is I chose a career in sport where no one knows who he is.
mm,
And for those in our who are listening, it's like Albert Ellis, like the John Wooden of
yeah,
psychology. So it'd be like you were like an assistant coach on John Wooden's staff. Like, that's amazing. But yeah, I
yeah.
chose a career no one knows. So every once in a while I'll drop an Albert Ellis reference and they're like, I don't know who that is. So it's cool that you have a reaction to it. That's awesome.
Oh man, because I'm deeper into like the psychology piece and all of that. So hearing his name now, it's like when you have a frame of reference of who he is, I'm like, okay, he's one of the OGs, like the top tier of this space. I have a level of respect to that. And so I didn't think I have any level of connection to him at this point, but to hear you say that, I'm like, okay, that's
You do.
yeah, that's crazy. But I know people like you said, they're just like, who is this guy? This Albert Ellis. It's Albert Einstein. Y'all trying to say him? Like, no, it's not Albert Einstein. It's
Yeah. He was a brilliant man, and it was an unbelievable education. I'm grateful for the time that I was there. It was amazing. Just to hear him think and the way he cared for people was really unlike anything I've ever seen.
mm, that's another episode in itself. So that's crazy. But um, I think the generational piece of resiliency is very interesting too because I think it's always a fixated viewpoint. So it's always relative to their point of view of what they say resilience is what interests me. So like you said, I used to have to go up the mountain to and from school both ways, or used to hike through the snow with my bare feet. And it's all these crazy, absurd things that just emphasizes the difficulty of what they went through. And more than likely, it was physical labor to some extent. And you say, oh, you kids got it easy because you have the school bus to come to you right in front of your house, or um, you don't have to worry about this, that, and the third. You can have food right here at your doorstep versus we had to go out and farm and hunt. And I used to go with my granddad when we go to the farm and slaughter the pigs and so on. Whatever their story is, that's what they have. Versus now it's so easy. But I think they lose sight of, not to go too nerdy here, but you understand where I'm coming from. Once you solve one problem, that creates 10 more problems. So
That's right.
you create the iPhone, that solved so many problems. But now you have to figure out, okay, it needs to stay charged. How to create a good charger. I don't want to have listen to music, so I have to do this. And they want to do that, I have to do that. So it creates 10 more problems. So yes, us having cars and buses are amazing. But now we have to figure out, okay, now I have to get the kids up in time for school. I have to make sure they're fed because the school aren't going to feed them. Well, I don't have the money for this, so how am I going to figure out that? So yes, we have solved this problem from this year, this problem from this. So generationally, 10 years later, you solved 10 problems that are really big problems from your era and your generation. But they created 10 more problems for us to figure out how to solve. So I think some of it shifted from physical problems to more head and shoulders problems, more mental problems. And today in social media and the pressure that kids have with that of having, like when I was younger, social media was just goofy stuff. You're just a free kid doing whatever. Now you have kids making millions of dollars off of social media. So the stress and pressure of that to where I have to manage my mental health, but I still need to show up and post because I have to maintain this brand and this image. I have to post because if I don't, my brand is going to crash. But I'm a 13-year-old kid with this Twitch page and I don't want to stream today because whatever happened in my life has me in this situation. But I have to show up and perform. Is that not resilience at the same time? Just because I'm not having to hike? So it's just the environment of it's different. The texture of it's different, but it's still a level of resilience. It just comes in different form and different shape versus having to hike up the mountain both ways to get to church or get to school. So I think that's the thing that I think about now. It's like you lose sight of what the struggle is in 1980 versus 2024 or 2025 or whatever.
I think the paradox, because I agree with you 100% wholeheartedly. I think the paradox is we're on a quest to eliminate discomfort.
Mhm.
And I think the reality is discomfort exists. I don't think you can live life without discomfort. Like, there's that old Zen phrase, within life, there is pain. Like, I actually think that the true luxury of life is when we can choose what discomfort we want to tolerate. So to your point, it's like we could live life without cell phones and it might increase our attention span, but we also wouldn't have the ability to contact somebody immediately when there's an emergent situation that requires it.
Mhm.
So I think the concept of like, well, is this generation getting soft and all that? It's like, no, I think what we're talking about is what their uncomfortable or what their discomfort is about is harder for like my generation to understand because we had other discomforts to prioritize. So, again, walking up the mountain both ways and all that, that was our discomfort. Now that we've avoided that with cars, your discomfort is the idea of smog or, so the discomfort exists in life, I think is a fact. And us judging the discomfort, like, well, that's not uncomfortable. Like, you want to know what real discomfort is? Let me show you. Like, I think that's somewhat ridiculous. And to your point, this is the healthiest human beings have ever been in the history of human civilization. We're living longer. We're living better qualities of life across most of the world. Like there are still many places of poverty and lots of places where death is evident and disease is evident. But as an overall, we are the healthiest this species has ever been. And yet we have a lot of people, especially in American culture, who are reporting the least amount of happiness since they've really started measuring it.
Mm.
And you look at things like teenage suicide rates. Like there is a direct link to the introduction of social media. I read an interesting article where they talked about the last time you saw such a behavioral spike that was linked to some kind of trigger was the introduction of crack cocaine in the 80s and the crime rate. So it was like crime was like this, and then crack was introduced and crime went way up. Same thing was like teenage suicide attempts and suicidal ideation offering was kind of like pretty low. And then all of a sudden social media gets introduced, and then all of a sudden suicidal ideation goes way, way up. So it becomes this idea of like, all right, old man, and probably talking to myself because I am an old man, like maybe I don't understand what it's like when someone posts something on Insta and no one likes it from the friend group.
Mm.
Like if I posted, first of all, I'm not really on that space, but if I were to post something and no one liked it, I wouldn't know that that's supposed to be a painful form of rejection.
Mm.
To a 16-year-old who's starting to forge meaningful relationships and is using the technology as a mechanism or a tie to that, is constantly checking her her iPhone, like check, like no like. That's duress.
Mm.
I don't think we have to judge it. I also think, like, while we're on the subject matter, like, I think it's interesting how we have chosen to kind of soften our language. Like, there was a time where, like, the word retarded was a diagnostic term.
Mm.
Now it's an insult. So we've used the word neurodivergent to kind of help describe some of the same kind of symptomology that we used back in, like, say, the 70s and 80s to describe retardedness. I think, yes, that's a nice evolution, and it's really wonderfully woke to come up with a better terminology. but the symptomology doesn't change. The condition that the individual who meets those requirements doesn't change. So
Hmm.
by changing the word, there is a level of us being more sensitive and aware. And yet at the same time, I think certain aspects of the reality are still there and still in existence. So how much better off are we using the word neurodivergent, for example? In some ways, I think it's a real advantage. In other ways, it's like all we've done is just play with the words. We haven't cured the situation. And then there's some people might be offended, like, why do you have to cure it? Why don't we just accept the differences of people and how they function? Fair enough. So to me, the mechanism of the word is not meant to be used as a weapon. It's meant to be used as a way to help describe and help people understand what they're engaged with or experiencing.
Yeah, I think my generation or my age group, or however you want to label it, we're in a very interesting mix because I'm old enough to know pre-social media and part of the generation that still played outside and the that level of connection to the older generation before us. So I'm young enough to still experience and understand that hit of, oh, nobody liked my post, and to understand social media and technology fairly easily because I still grew up with it. So I was in that weird mix of when the 90s to early 2000s to where the internet became a thing and phones became more popular and that whole, the life changing cycle that we went through in those 10, 20 years. And so
Yeah.
I, I hear that generation before us and they'll say certain stuff and I'm like, yeah, I'm with you, man. You don't need social media. And so I understand the concept of social media is fake. Like I can delete all of my social media and life will move on swimmingly for me now. Business might suffer, certain things on that end will hurt. But me personally, I'll be completely fine deleting every social media app I have. I contemplate with that a lot. Like I don't care about this entity, but I understand what it does for me, so I use it. But then it's the part of me who engages with it, and I'm like, man, nobody like my post. What's wrong with me? Do I not have friends? Are they unfollow me? Like, do I, the follow for follow thing? I understand all of it. I get it. But I'm still battling with, I don't care about this thing. I will delete this app today and be removed from it. And then on the other aspect of, like you said, certain language terminology that we use, I'm still of the old school who listen to rougher things. And I grew up with the Looney Tunes that was very violent. The Animaniacs and the cartoons we had back in the day were pretty graphic compared to the bubbly, cute stuff we watch today. I'm like, man, y'all are soft. Like, what are y'all watching here? What is going on? So
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I like to jump in on this if I can is
mm,
like when I hear somebody of my generation complain about how easy kids have it,
mm,
I just want to return the question with like, do you want them to suffer? I mean,
yeah,
do you want them to have it as bad as you have it? Like, or had it? Like, isn't that what we want is for them to not have, like, I want them to have their own discomfort and I want their discomfort to be a safer discomfort. But the reality is they're going to still match the same level of intensity of that experience.
mm,
So I like the fact that a hangnail is now the biggest issue in their lives. Great. You know what? If your worst day is no one's liking your tweet or your X or your Insta or like your Twitch, like awesome. I'm glad that that's and I'm also glad that you now have an opportunity to work through that discomfort
mm,
and come out with a level of mental fortitude and resilience. That's awesome. And if what you came out of that experience is the same as what I came out of walking through the snow uphill, then aren't we both better off human beings? Why do we have to justify the hero's journey, if you will? Like, well, they didn't really earn it.
mm,
Sure, they did. They just earned it through their generation's path.
mm.
There's that.
And that's funny. 'Cause that's exactly where I was going to go next. Is that no, it's
Yeah.
funny because there's somebody I follow and they say how all the time you hear, I want to make life better for my kids. I want to be able to make a whole bunch of money and then leave an inheritance for my kids. But he was like, I'm not doing that for my kids. Like I'm making $100 million a year and they're going to have little to nothing because the recipe to make a great human being not include me handing them this fortune. So for him personally, like I asked you earlier, what's the environment to create a confident kid? Part of that recipe for him to create a confident kid or a great human being includes that level of struggle. So for him, I'm not going to hand you money because that's handicapping you of developing certain skills, a certain mindset to where if I handed you the money, you're missing out on this lesson. But if I gave you the tools and if I gave you a car versus giving you the tools to build your own car, there's two different people that I'm building or creating. So for him, he says, I want to give my kids these tools to be able to understand that, hey, I can build any car I want to. I can recreate my own Tesla versus I go and buy a Tesla. And now you miss out on those lessons. I think that's kind of the dynamic that some of my generation has too, where we just want to give our kids everything, but then we turn around and call them soft because we handed them everything. Then, oh, they don't understand the
Right.
quality or the meaning of hard work. Well, let's figure out the full thing here. Did you install on them hard work, or did you just give them the output without giving them the understanding of the input? And I think that's the evolution we're going to get to with these conversations of we see the outcome of what that generation did when they had the money. Now they gave their kids everything, but now you want to call them soft. But the next conversation is going to be like, what are we doing now to install the softness in them? If that's what we want to call it. So, what are your thoughts around that piece of it?
Yeah. So I just read a book called The Winner Effect by Ian Robertson. And one of the arguments that he makes is so there's a whole chapter about like generational wealth and generational success. So do sons and daughters of successful people have a better chance? Like they have more resources and they also have a model. So do they have a better chance or do they have a worse chance of being successful? So, it's interesting because he kind of like references certain musicians, like, like John Lennon was an amazing musician, but, his kids weren't as successful. Or, he references Pablo Picasso as a great painter and his son Paulo was not so successful. So it became an interesting mechanism. And what he argues in the book, and I don't know if it has merit or not, I'm still kind of digesting it. And I haven't looked at the research as to whether or not it supports it. But his argument, which I'm curious about, was he said that children of successful people become successful themselves when the parent shows them the blueprint, sort of gives them, he uses the phrase, the ladder and the blueprint that walks them through how they became successful.
Hmm.
So let's say you are the number one podcaster in the world and you are just crushing it. And how you got from step one to being the biggest podcaster in the world, if you showed your children how you did that, if you showed the work, not just the result, then they have a really strong chance of being successful themselves. By contrast, he says where that step fails is when those that are highly successful start to treat it like it was luck, or they treat it like they are special, or he called it, I think, kind of like the God effect, where it's like, I'm just like God, like I'm just that good kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I think it's interesting is you look at certain individuals who maybe are like the son of a coach, or like you've got LeBron James's son right now in the NBA, or you've got, there's all kinds of GMs who were, the sons of coaches and coaches that were the sons of GMs. Like you see folks that have lineage, and one of the indicators of their success is whether or not their father or their mother showed them how they were successful. And I think that's a really neat thought. And so I just kind of what you're talking about as far as how we educate.
Mhm.
Instead of dismissing, oh, hey, you got it easy, I had it hard, and look at how brilliant I am and all my success. You go, hey, your hardship reminds me of my hardship. Here's some of the things I did to navigate through that hardship. See if that works for you, and then go forth and continue to take on hardships and take them on, take them on, build, and then you'll have your path of success too.
Mhm.
I think that's a pretty cool concept.
Yeah, that reminds me of the book Mindset from Carol. I can't remember her last name. Yes. And she talked a lot about the growth mindset and how, I think it was like the entire chapter about parenting. And I think the book can be summarized to saying, hey, really emphasize and focus the input that you want them to have. And you almost ignore the outputs almost. You almost just, they're irrelevant, good, bad, or indifferent. You want to praise the inputs that you want them to have. You want to really teach and install them to focus on the input. So instead of if celebrating they're a smart kid, like, oh, you really studied for that. Like, man, I respect that you stayed up and put in the work to get this outcome. Because whether they get an A or a C or an F is irrelevant. Because if they don't have a high level of work ethic and understanding what it means to study, what it means to go to the library, or what it means to go down the 10th page of Google to figure this out, or go to the 15th YouTube video, whatever library, modern day library, what they have now. If they don't understand it, if that's what it takes to become great, then the outcome of being great will be, like you said, the God effect of, oh, I can just do this. I'm just naturally gifted. So you lose the input of the work ethic of what it means to be great. And now you understand better of the success of what it takes. So like Kobe's big on, I have to put in the reps. I have to put in the work because I'm a person who does this thing. I'm the person who will put in 10,000 reps. I'm the person who will sit here and lock in the gym for 3 hours. I don't have a game tomorrow, but that's not the point. I'm a person who will focus on the input versus the output. I think that's the true essence of kind of what my mentality was, of like focus on the input and the growth mindset of Carol was talking about in her book. So that reminded me of that.
Yeah. Well, it's about effort.
Yeah.
You got to put it, if you want to go on a quest to greatness, you can't do it without effort. And, to justify, well, that's not enough effort, or to question how much effort, but it fundamentally comes down to effort. And I think a big driver of effort is passion. Like if you love something enough, or if you want something bad enough, you'll go through the effort to go and get it. And so again, I think part of what we're trying to do, I think, across generations, is to encourage people to go forth and do things in an effortful way so that you can increase the chances of having the kind of experience and accomplishment that you're hoping to experience and accomplish.
So how much would you weigh in effort or growth mindset or work ethic, whatever, along with that environment or the ingredient, the puzzle piece of creating a confident kid? Like how much would you, like what tier system would
Well,
you put that on?
I mean, what's interesting is Carol Dweck kind of created a formula where she made effort sound like it was twice as valuable as everything else.
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of truth. Like, effort is key. I still think you have to be this tall to ride the roller coaster, right? So I might have all the effort in the world, but I can't pick up my house.
Mhm.
I might have all the motivation in the world. Like, look, maybe there's like my dog is trapped underneath it. I still can't pick up the house. Like, at some point, we have to acknowledge certain aspects of truth, which is like, you got to be this tall, you got to be this strong, you got to be this fast. Like, it doesn't matter how much effort I have. I don't think I'm ever going to hold an Olympic record in, in the long jump,
Mhm.
but I can get as close as I can possibly get. So I think if it was just effort, there would be a lot of non-athletic people out there breaking records all the time, because there's some dudes that have unbelievable physical gifts and a low effort or drive. And you go, man, it's amazing how this guy gets 20 points night in and night out when he doesn't. I could only imagine what he'd be like if he had given it the kind of effort. And the ones that that are, generationally gifted, the Wayne Gretzky's and the Kobe Bryant's of the world and Michael Jordan's. It's like those dudes had amazing gifts and they had a passion that was unparalleled and that led to effort. And man, is it not just an absolute gift to watch them do what they do?
Hmm. Yeah, okay, so how, not necessarily delusion, but how would you separate cockiness versus confidence? Because you start to hear people who they're confident, they're confident, they're confident, and they're even more confident, and they're cocky. At what point does confidence turn into cockiness and arrogance?
Well, I think let's come up with an agreed definition that cockiness is negative,
Hmm.
whereas confidence is positive. So if we just start with that concept, I would say it becomes very easy to differentiate between the two based off of the behaviors that are associated with them. So if confidence is positive, then positive behavior should be linked to it. Like, hey, I'm confident enough to ride my bike to school. Great. And I made it. Cockiness, if it's going to be by definition a negative aspect, it's the same kind of psychological construct of a belief state of doing something, but more aligned with negative behaviors that are associated with it. So confidence would be things like recognizing the work that I have to put in order to be in shape so that I can handle an 82 game season. Cockiness would be like, I'm so good, I don't need to work out in the off season. Then the season rolls around and I'm perpetually injured because I'm not ready physically because I was too arrogant and cocky about how easy the threat or the task was. So I just think, to me, if I were to try to simplify it, it would be confidence is associated with beneficial behaviors and cockiness is associated with detrimental behaviors, like not working out because you think you got this. Sort of the rabbit and the hare, or no, sorry, the tortoise and the hare,
Yeah.
right? Like that's cockiness.
Mm. I think that's the accurate way that we can push towards it because Kobe is one of the, I'll keep it basketball example, but he was known, him and Jordan were like, these guys are arrogant. Well, they really work their butts off. I don't think they're out here just saying, they're not saying that I'm the only reason we're winning. I'm not saying anything that is untrue. They believe that the work that they put in should get them this result. They believe that I've trained, I've put in the condition, I've lifted weights, I've exhausted every resource I can to be able to put up 40 points when I want to put up 40 points. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. I don't think there's anything necessarily arrogant or cocky about that. That's just the level of self-belief that they have. But they got labeled arrogant and cocky because it's a different conversation we get into. But I think a lot of times that is coming from people who are insecure. And for you to have that level of confidence is wrong. So I'm going to attach this to you and say, hey, you're arrogant and now you're cocky now because I can't fathom having that level of confidence. That's my personal thought of where a piece of that comes from is I'm insecure, so I'm putting that on you.
My response to that would be this. I can call you blue. That doesn't make you blue. People can call Michael Jordan arrogant. That doesn't make him arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, if we measure behaviors, so we can say he's confident in that he believes every shot's going to go in, and we can say he's arrogant in the fact that he doesn't treat his teammates respectfully. So if we want to play with words, I think one of the best ways to do that is to link them to behaviors that we can measure. Because I think you can be confident and believe every shot's going to go in because you worked hard, and you don't have to belittle your teammates. Like, I don't know if confidence and belittling teammates go hand in hand, but I do think being arrogant and belittling your teammates does.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just me creating a construct. So Again, I can call you silly. That doesn't mean you are silly.
Hmm.
In fact, you haven't been silly this whole conversation. So me calling it doesn't make it true. Now, you could go out and do something silly. That still doesn't make you silly. That just means you did something that was silly for a while.
Hmm.
So similarly, it's like you can be confident in a moment, but I don't know if you can universally be confident. That kind of goes back to what we were saying before, which is like, Ant-Man might be totally confident in his ability to play sports, but how confident does he feel about survival skills on a deserted island? Does he know how to turn a volleyball into somebody, call it Wilson? Does he like, does he know how to build a raft? I don't know. So I think most psychological constructs really are internal, external, and a relationship dynamic with the environment as the environment fluctuates. And the environment includes not just situations, but also people within it. If I tell you you can do it, does that give you a sense of confidence? Only if you believe that what I'm saying is true.
Hmm.
So you got to take that, bring it internal and digest it, et cetera, and so on.
Hmm. Man, this has been another good one. It's always fun
Oh,
to
cool.
go off with you. And I'm even more interested in this question now. Um, but what is the best advice that you've gotten about confidence, or the best nugget that you've heard from someone about confidence that you take home with you and you're like, man, I've viewed confidence totally differently now, or this impacted me and my confidence after I heard this.
Um, I don't know if this is universal for everybody, but this resonates a lot for me personally.
Hmm.
There are some people in life that emulate Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in an action movie, where it's like they get shot in the arm and then they're using that same arm to pull themselves up on the helicopter to go defeat the bad guy. Like they're like bulletproof. And I think that's what some people think confidence is, right? For me personally, I think about like Bruce Willis in that original movie Die Hard, old school reference here for you, um, where he is beat up and bloody, but still keeps going. I think a more modern reference would be like John Wick or Mr. Nobody. Like, I think it's one thing to be bulletproof. I think it's another thing to feel every ounce of pain and suffering in the process and still not giving up. And I think it's interesting because I see friends and colleagues who are like, today is the greatest day ever and the world is awesome. And, and they have that kind of optimism, like, oh, that bad thing happened and it's probably meant for a reason and all that kind of stuff. And I go, for me, like when something bad happens, like I feel that pain. Like, when I'm working with a team and they lose and we're all upset, like I feel that pain. And so I tend to think for myself about the experience of confidence is really not the absence of fear. It's not the absence of suffering. It's the idea of feeling those emotions and those negative experiences fully, those painful experiences fully, and still going forward. And that's always resonated with me because I feel like that's what has happened throughout my life is like I did tear my ACL, but I continue to play soccer. I have had moments of doubt and pain and yet continue to try to find a way through it. And I don't know. I like to think of myself as Mr. Nobody or John Wick more than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. That's the hero I'd like to be. So that would be, I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess if I were to summarize it, it's what I tell my kids a lot. Feel the fear and do it anyways.
Mm. I think the beautiful part of what I'm hearing you talk about confidence, there's a level of, like, more recently, I kind of removed the feeling of confidence and I've made it very practical. I've gotten more into philosophy and more into psychology in a different route, and I've got into more practical sense, and I've made it more black and white. But from hearing you talk about it, you've added the feeling and emotion back to it, but you made it more tangible and more practical. Because I don't say never, but I haven't correlated the boldness and bravery to it the way that you kind of explained it, or the way that um you've like you just made transparent and vulnerability connect to confidence. And I don't think I've heard that connection a lot of times. So
Oh,
you
cool.
usually confidence is just the false bravado. Usually it's just the macho man of, oh, like you said, I got shot in my arm and I can just go through it. No, sometimes you have to be confident and just say, look, I got shot in my arm and I'm done. Like, hey, I'm giving y'all I'm at 10%, but that's 100% of what I got for today. That's a level of confidence for me to be transparent and to be vulnerable to say, hey, not only am I out today, that's being transparent. I have something going on. I can't make it as being transparent. Being vulnerable, I got shot in my arm. I made a dumb decision last night. I went out and me and my friends were drinking and the gun went off and hit me. Like, stupid decision. You can judge me for that now. It's like, oh, being vulnerable and saying, hey, I got shot and you can question my character now and that can hurt my reputation now. All these things can happen, but I have to be confident enough to let that be there to be attacked now. And I don't think I've heard too many people reference confidence in that sense. Like you made it be more higher emotionally intelligence now versus just
Oh,
like this
cool.
little woo woo, just believe in yourself. You can like, you know what I'm talking about. You can do it. Today's going to be a great day. And some people need that. I think that's cool. But when that moment hits, you become the man in the arena. And listen, I don't need the ABCs of confidence right now. I need something I need something that I can connect to. Like, yeah, I got shot too. I feel you. Might have got shot with a water gun and it hurt me this way. You got shot with a 12 gauge or whatever. But like you said, my pain is my pain. That's my worst day. But I can relate to you in some extent. So you add a different context, different layer to it that I appreciate. This has been enlightening in a different way. So I really enjoyed
Cool.
this, man. Um,
Yeah, that's a good pickup on your part. This has been fun. Thank you so much for the conversation. This was good.
yeah, I appreciate it. But I want to ask you one last question. Um, so now I want to flip it the other way. Like, what's the best advice that you can give now through your years of research and going through this? What's the best advice that you can give to someone now if you kind of just give them this one nugget to say, hey, this is what you can do for your confidence. This is a different way that you can view confidence now.
Yeah, I would stick to feel the fear and do it anyways. Feel the doubt and do it anyways. Find a reason to keep going forward and then absorb everything that you learn, the good, the bad, and the indifferent through that process.
Mm,
You know, for me, confidence is there are people who get to that ledge and they look and they go, oh, that's pretty far down there. And they take a step back. And then there's others that look at that ledge and then they jump. And I think there's something really powerful and impressive about that. So yeah, feel the fear and do it anyways. That's what I tell my kids.
mm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of summarize everything you talked about and enlighten me on today. So I appreciate you coming back for part two. This has been fun again. It's always fun talking to you because I can kind of nerd out a little bit more, and I have to be disciplined and stay focused on the topic because you'll say something, you say something later, and you say, I'm like, oh, I want to go there. Albert Ellis really caught me. I was about to just forget everything else, like, tell me something about him, but I'm patting myself on the back for staying focused and getting through it. So, but now this has been fun again. It's always been good talking to you. So I appreciate you taking time to come out for part two. Um, it means a lot. So thank you.
But you're an incredible interview. I really enjoy dialoguing with you and engaging with you. You ask great questions.
No, thank you, man. You set it up by being somebody great to talk to. So I appreciate it. It's a partnership here. We're doing pretty well. So, uh,
That's cool. All
sure.
right, my man. Hey, wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, man. You too. So thank you everybody for tuning in and watching and listening. Make sure you subscribe, like, share, whatever else people say, do it for me too, because I need it too. Show me some love. But thank you guys for watching, listening. See you on the next one.
That was a master class from Scott Goldman. We learned that confidence is so much more than just a feeling. We learned the pillars of building confidence and how each generation impacts the next in terms of developing their own confidence and how we can build the skills needed to succeed in life. So now we learn the mental performance side of building confidence. Let's get into the skill side of it. We're going to have an actual skill trainer break down the specific skills needed to build confidence in the game of basketball.
We're trying to inspire people that they're worthy and capable of extraordinary things. And how do we do that? Is we try to put challenges that are just beyond what they think they can do. And if we show them constantly doing things they didn't think they could, then they're starting to believe that I didn't think I could do this, and now I'm doing it with ease. Well, maybe I can do something in this other realm. I've seen myself pour so much hard work into something that I know I can work really hard to achieve this next thing. And so I think sometimes just presenting like the right level of challenge and showing them like you have all of this inside of you.
So in the next episode, I sit down with Beth Mouye. She is a fellow skills trainer, but she's also a certified mental performance coach. We talk about how we can build confidence in basketball and specific skills, specifically shooting, defense, and ball handling. She's been helping young athletes and youth athletes for a few years now, man. So not just on the training side, but also in the coaching side. She has a background and experience in coaching as well. So together we break down different strategies and how players can build their confidence in the specific skills, but overall in the game of basketball.